Welcome to the Code with Jason meetup. So, in case not everybody's aware, people here and dear viewer, yourself on YouTube, I'll explain what I'm working on. Um, so, for the last, I don't know, maybe year or more, I've been working on this product called SaturnCI. It's a continuous integration platform. And when I finished my book that I released in October of this year, 2024, I decided to make Saturn CI my main focus. Um, and the reason I created Saturn CI is because I really don't enjoy working with GitHub Actions or Circle CI, because the UI I find to be just really janky and clunky and not only is it unpleasant to use, just to put it candidly, I think the UIs are stupid. Like when a test fails, what are you going to want to see in the UI? You're going to want to see the failure, but you have to dig in order to see the failure. Stuff like that. And so I'm building a product with a better UI. So I'll share my screen so we can see the product and see what we're looking at. 1 second here. Yes. Okay. So here's what the dashboard looks like. Um, and unlike Circle CI, for example, we have this master detail list, or Circle CI has master detail, but when you click on an item, you go to an entirely different page. Whereas with Saturn CI, it's more like an email inbox where you always have something open to the right. And when you go from build to build, it just changes what's on the right instead of you taking you to an entirely different page so that you have to go to the detail page, back to the master page, and pogo stick between the two. So that's one fundamental thing that I think is better. But the issue that I'm facing right now is that it's just not fast enough. Like when I click from this build to this build, for example, you can see that there's a delay there. And that's not acceptable. Because I think performance is very much a part of UX, and the worse the performance is, the worse the UX is. The better the performance is, the better the UX is. So I want to have excellent performance in the places where performance really matters, and I think performance does matter for this. Again, I mentioned that the other products are kind of janky. I need this product to not be janky. Okay.
Jason, I think that also matters just from like the perspective of we always want our test feedback to be fast. I
Mm-hmm.
almost never go out to my CI servers that I use other than if there's like a problem or I have to configure something and it's just too much information all the time and it's slow often. So if you can make it like fast, like you're talking about, and it's pleasant to get in and switch around and jump around to different things, then it's nicer to use, right? There's less friction. So I think that works well.
Yeah, yeah, I totally agree. I'm gonna go to the yeah, network tab, I think. And I just want to see how long it takes this page to load. Um, 599 milliseconds. I'm going to refresh it a few times. Actually, I'm sorry. Refresh is not what I want. I want when I go from page to page, how long does it take to load? That's what I'm interested in. So what do we need to see there? All right, I'm going to filter it by this test output thing. Okay. So it only says like, high 200s milliseconds, just under 300 milliseconds, but it feels slow. Um, so
And that,
uh-huh.
I was gonna say that 200 is what your Rails app is returning for content on the right.
Um,
Or I'm sorry, not the 200. The 253, 261
oh,
overall.
uh-huh.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
is there a lot of work involved in creating the content on the right?
I think there is. So if we look at what the content is, I'm actually a little surprised. It's like everything.
Mm.
The shell of the page, this like filter thing, this list that we see on the left, as well as the test content. So I'm a little surprised that it's so much stuff. And just as a cheap experiment, I'm curious what happens if we just basically like cache everything. I know that that's not going to be what we ultimately want, but I'm just curious what kind of benefit that brings us. Um, am I where I think I am?
I think you need to add some animation. It's better for a user to see the page change.
You said animation?
Yeah, like loader, for example.
Hmm. I would prefer that we can just make it load instantaneously to obviate the need for any kind of loading indicator or anything like that. And even easier than caching and something that gives us a more certain answer. What if I just blow away the contents of this page? How much does that help? Okay, interesting. Blowing away the contents on the right helps almost not at all. So that's useful information. Um, I happened to try this offline, so I kind of already know what happens, but what about with this build list? This thing on the left is what I call the build list. What if instead of doing all the builds, I just do like the first two there? So I go between these two. That makes a pretty big difference. And I feel like it almost appears instantaneous. So if we get to around 150 milliseconds, it seems like that gets us to a good place.
So, based off of what you were saying earlier, when you click it, everything is reloading, even the build list.
That's a good question. I don't know because I'm not familiar enough with how turbo frames and such works.
Okay, fair
I
enough.
think it may be the case that everything gets sent, but only what changed gets no, no, no. Everything gets sent, but only like the turbo frame target gets changed.
Changed. So, and I'm a little newer on the turbo as well.
Hmm.
At least the newer version of it. I kind of come more from like an HTMX sort of approach, but
Hmm.
I'm quite sure that turbo is something very similar where your left hand panel can be its own isolated um, call to the server to render that content. So it's almost like you're rendering a partial there. So when this
Hmm.
page loads the first time, you're sort of getting potentially one or two different calls. The first one would be your left hand panel, and that's all the content. So you'd have your page that loads, your
Hmm.
left hand panel is async that loads. So that's your second call. And then the third one would be if you're going to default to the first
Okay.
selected object. So that way, as you go through and click it, the right hand panel should be the only content that changes on the page, and it's the only content you're asking for on the server and the only content
Hmm.
that you're receiving back. So
Well, if we can do something like that, then that seems compelling. Um,
We know that that's going to be really fast because the test where you removed everything didn't end up changing it that much. So the right hand content went away and it didn't change the speed.
good
So that would
point.
be the amount of speed that it would take in order to just deliver the right hand content too, probably.
That's a great point. Um, yeah, so let's take a look at how to achieve that. And obviously it's wasteful to get this stuff every single time because we just don't need it. So let's look at how this is working right now.
Out of curiosity, do you guys think it's
Mhm.
is it just looping through each build that is like ultimately taking the large amount of time there?
Yeah, I mean, it seems pretty clear that like the more builds there are, the longer it's going to take.
Yeah.
Since we have like 400 some builds, That's what's causing the cost.
I'm a little surprised that, I mean, 400 builds is obviously a lot, but like it's not like that big of a loop. So I'm a little surprised that just looping over with the simple content you have is that impactful. It's really interesting to learn that though.
Yeah, I'm a little surprised too. Um, I am surprised also, especially because as you can see here, we're caching all this stuff. But that is what we're seeing. So let's see here.
Is it a lot
Um,
worse if you remove the cache?
sorry.
Mm.
Is it a lot worse if you remove the cache then?
Oh, good question. Oops. Yep.
Oh wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, pages
Indeed.
still
Yeah.
loading. Yeah, I think that's all the information we need about that. Okay. So this link, these links here, they're going to project build path. So let's see what that's all about. Oh, why did I do that? Okay. Um, I think we want to go to builds controller, and this would of course be the show action. Okay, interesting. So this build show action gets like everything. Like it does stuff that deals with the filter, which is this thing right here. Um, by the way, that took 26, almost 27 seconds. Um, so does the filter, um, here's more filter stuff. And then if we go to the view for this, um, yeah, it includes this partial here, this build list partial. And I actually don't know where the filter comes out, but it shows this build list partial. Oh, actually, I think the filter is considered part of the list. Yeah. So we are rendering more than we need to. All we really need to render is obviously this right-hand pane, which I suppose is this. Um, let's let's make the border visible so we can see what we're dealing with here. Huh. That didn't have the expected effect. Okay. Um, let's do this. Let's just delete it for a second. Huh.
It's not the cache issue, is
I
it?
think I know.
Oh,
Um, this might be a design flaw. Let's do this. Oops, I want to do 2 pixels solid red. Okay. Yeah. Okay. So I was on the wrong page. Um, but it's easy to get tricked because there's these two very similar templates,
yeah.
one for a build and one for a run. So just so it's clear, this whole thing is a build, but then you're always looking at one particular run because you have runs running concurrently. Each one runs half your tests. And so when I click on a build, I actually end up on a run. If you look up at the URL bar, you see that it doesn't say which build I'm on, it says which run I'm on because you're always looking at a run. Um, the one case where you're not going to be looking at a run, I don't know if this is going to work. But if I do rerun, I might have okay, there we go, and then cancel. Oh no, that didn't give me what I wanted. But if the build is in a state of not started, then it won't show you these runs and stuff. It'll show you a slightly different page. And that's what this page is. It'll give you only
Okay.
the options to run or delete. Anyway, I'm not sure what I might want to do about that, so I'm gonna not think about it right now. Okay, so anyway, this thing with the red border, that's the part that we want to load, and we want to only load that part.
Right. So
Yes.
in your build list, when you're iterating over those, um, and Brandon or any of you guys, I don't know if you have more experience in the turbo world, but I think that on the link within those lists or those list items, when you're clicking it,
Hmm.
that's where you want to apply whatever syntax to the link there that will just say,
Yeah.
I'm targeting that frame. And you may already have that. Yeah. Okay, cool.
Yeah, I do say that it's turbo frame build,
Yeah.
but when I okay, sorry, let's go to the build controller again. I do say that it's turbo frame build, but when we go to the controller action that this is taking you to, is doing way more stuff than it needs to in order to show that one run.
Right. So I should just get the one build and return ideally the partial or whatever, the view only without the layout.
Yeah,
So just that data.
just to call something out explicitly. I touched on this a second ago, but just to make sure it's clear. Every build has zero or more runs.
Mhm.
So it may be that a build has zero runs. Normally here, since my concurrency is set to two, all of my builds is, oh, here we go. Sorry, not started. Where's not started? There we go. So this is what it looks like if a build is not started. The template's slightly different. You get these
Mhm.
buttons that say run or delete. Those are your only two options. With a build that has been started, you can rerun it or cancel it or delete it. With one that's not started, you can only run or delete. So the template's slightly different. So this is a case where a build has zero runs. So we do need to account for that.
Mhm.
Um, Obviously, the idea of having this linked to a specific run doesn't make sense because there is no run. It has zero runs. So we need to deal with that somehow. Um, Up to now, my way of dealing with this was to have every one of these links linked to a build. And then if the build happens to have zero runs, then we just show the build. If the build has more than zero runs, we just show the first run. I think that we can still do that. We just want to do it a little bit differently than we've been doing it up to now. Instead of using the main build show action, the same one that you get when you just load this page by refreshing or whatever. Instead of that one, we want a different show action that only does what's needed in order to get you the content here. And it can get you the content for the build or the content for the run, whichever one makes sense, but we want to only do the minimum amount of work necessary. Now, I said we could have a different controller action for that. Conceivably, I think we could have the same controller action maybe, but we just do different stuff. But I don't know if I want to, I don't know if that sounds appealing to me.
Can you show?
Typically, oh, go ahead.
I think so. Because Mike's mentioned, click on the link and then it just returning the, the run part
Hmm.
without the rest of the framework, or the layout. I mean, can you show that piece for me?
That piece being which piece?
Piece being the part where we're saying when we click on that build link,
Hmm.
that it's just rendering the partial and not the full template.
Yeah. Well, if it were to just render the partial, then it would just render this much.
Yeah.
Currently, we have no way for it just to render the partial because it's not even a partial yet.
Okay.
Mhm.
Okay. So I think so. We're saying we have the action. It renders the full show template, and within that template we have the build tag. Um, but every time we're clicking on that link, it's re-rendering the entire show template.
Exactly. And the show template includes everything, the shell of the site, the build list, everything.
Maybe this is a dumb question then, because uh, but I thought by using the turbo frame tag, we were carving off a section already to say this is just the HTML that I want. So I'm a little surprised this isn't already just returning the a separate template just for the turbo frame piece.
The reason it's not returning that part by itself is because I'm using the same controller action both for the full page loads and for the turbo navigation.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah. So what I have now is great for the full page loads, but it's
Right.
wasteful for the turbo navigation.
And that's why you're suggesting making a new action.
Yeah, exactly.
That makes more sense. Thanks.
So your full page load this here, what would you call this view? I'm looking at all of the, like, what's your, that left-hand column would be representative of what? All of your builds, right?
Hmm.
So, and again, this is my 38-second take on it. So,
Hmm.
take it for what it's worth. So that to me would be you're rendering your builds index view, right? Which would be your left hand, and you've got your panel to the right that doesn't have anything in it.
Hmm.
And when I click on a build, I'm asking it to show me all of the associated runs, if there are any, right?
Hmm.
So your runs index is kind of what I'm looking at. So it's sort of like builds slash one slash runs, right, in your URL to sort of keep the
Yeah.
UUITs a little simpler.
Hmm.
And what I'm looking at to the right is the runs index. So I think, I don't know if breaking
Sorry,
it
what you're
out
looking
that
at to the right is the run show.
Well, I think what Mike's
true,
pointing to 0, 1, and 2 possible runs, right? So he's thinking like from a URL, a RESTful URL standpoint, build slash one slash runs 0, 1, 2, right? Is that what you're thinking?
right? Right. So like on the right, you're right, you are showing a run because you've selected run one, right? But that whole red square is your runs index. So think of it like, oh, I'm going to show you a list of recipes and there are none. You have zero recipes, right? Same idea. Whereas here, you're saying I have zero runs, you had the one view. So in your controller, you would just say if runs is zero, you're displaying a different output versus if runs is not zero or positive, it's going to show you the runs index. And then on your runs index, this is where you're going to have sort of like old school list items, right? Run one, run two, run three for that build.
Yeah, interesting. This is where it gets quite nuanced. And I think once things get this nuanced and low level, people have a tendency to not want to discuss it.
Uh,
But these are exactly the things that should be discussed and debated and fought over and stuff like that because these things really matter. All right, so I'll share the way that I conceptualize this from my perspective, Mike.
yep.
and I'm open to being wrong, but here's how I'm looking at it now. And I want to find, yeah, here's some that are not started. So because the build is not started, it has no runs. Um, I could see a case for this being like the runs index page. You have zero runs. That could be one way of conceptualizing it. Another way of conceptualizing it is the way that I'm conceptualizing it now, which is that this is build X, whatever the build ID is. This is build X, and we're showing you the build. We're not showing you anything to do with runs, just this is the build show action. And I think either one of those is valid. And then when we go to a build that does have runs, you get linked to the build, but then it redirects you to a specific run. Because if I'm on run one, I'm on run one. This isn't the run index page. This is a run show page. This is the run one show page. This is the run two show page. I think that is a hill I'm willing to die on. Um, this one, I'm more open-minded about that. And I'm even open-minded about this, but I think it's pretty tough to make a case that this is anything other than a run show page.
The
Um,
the
yeah.
black section definitely is,
Okay.
but the top part where you have where it says remove obsolete task, this first level of what looks like tabs where you have test output, system logs, etc., and run one, run two. Like if you were to look at that, that to me looks like show me everything associated with this build with its
Agreed.
you see what I'm saying? And then all you're doing is sort of doing well, I don't have to go to another page to go see the run details. I have it right here. So run one, run two tabs, that in my mind, that top rectangle there, that's all your runs index. And when you click on run one or run two, that's where you're saying, now go give me the detail for that run one or run two, which is your black section there. And that is indeed the show page. So you're not wrong by any stretch. I think it's just you're pulling in. Well, this is where we're kind of circle back to the beginning. I think you're just really asking it to do a lot every time. So if you just sort of break it
Yeah.
up and think of it, I always, and this may be more like where Brandon's expertise is good too, is like think of it like an API, even though we're returning server generated content. Just like how could somebody just get that piece of content without having to pay the piper for everything?
Yeah. Yeah. So that brings up another topic with this whole thing. So there are a number of navs in this whole page. So there's the run nav. There is what you might call the build detail nav. In fact, I think that's the name of it, the build detail nav. So that's two navs, and then there's the build list. That's three navs. And then we have this like top level nav here. That's four. And then we even have, there's only one nav item here, but we have this uh, project settings. This is like the project nav. And by the way, it might not be obvious, but this like gray bar and the rectangle that it encloses, that represents a project. So if I go to like a different project, this one's called Panda. We can go to the settings for Panda. So that represents one project. So there are layers of nested navigation, and it's a bit subjective. But when we are on this page, where are we? My my way of conceptualizing it is that right now we're on a run detail page. It just so happens that the run detail page includes a run nav, a build nav, build list nav, top nav, blah blah blah. But just because we're being shown a particular build and a particular list of runs. To me, that doesn't imply run index. It only implies that we're on the run page, which has these navs.
And would you want to deep link to like run two, for example, as well? Is that you're
Absolutely.
okay?
Because, okay, here's an aspect of this product. Um, you can see that when I go to these past builds, it always defaults to the first run. But then when I click on this failed build, notice how it doesn't default to the first run. Because on the first run, there's no failures. CircleCI would show you
Yes.
this, but I go to the first run that has any failures because why would you not?
Yeah.
And so, you know, you're talking about some flaky test or something, you might want to copy this URL and paste it into Slack and be like, hey, can you look at this flaky test or whatever? So I definitely would want to deep link into something.
So getting back to the route that we were talking about adding, it seems like you already have the run detail. It seems like you were talking about wanting to hit the run detail and just have that detail returned as we're looking at the particular one, whether it's zero, one, or two. So are you thinking an
Yeah.
endpoint, another endpoint? But it seems like you already have the endpoint.
Yeah, that's where I struggle a bit because if we have, right now we have one endpoint and it's very logical. If we have two endpoints, how do we maintain clarity?
But you're when you go to build in the build action, the show action for build, I should say, is it also doing follow-up requests to the run, or are you just? I think I'm maybe still confused about that. Let me see your build controller again.
Yeah, I'll show you the build controller, but let me demonstrate one thing first because it might help. Um, you can see in the URL bar here that we have project slash blah 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 slash build slash blah blah blah.
Okay, great.
No runs, but then if we go to one with runs, we end up at a different URL, not because it links to a different place, but because the controller performed a redirect.
Okay.
Mm.
Yeah, so here we say if build.runs.any
Okay.
um, redirect either to the first failed run or just the first run.
Okay.
Now, on the when we're in a happy path, uh,
Hmm.
it has runs, and then let's see. So, okay, so you do have a run path that's being targeted here when you're redirecting. So, why is the turbo frame not already just returning the runs?
Because at the time we link, we don't know whether the particular build we're on right now has any runs or not. We could check. There's nothing stopping us from saying if this build has any runs, then link to the first run. Otherwise, link to the build. But then we'd basically have to have this logic
Everywhere.
in that template. And to me, that doesn't feel like an appropriate place to do that. It seems like making the view too smart. It's nicer to me if we don't have to worry about any of that right here and we just say link to the build. You figure out if anything special needs to happen, but it's only my responsibility just to link to the build and that's all.
Right. When in your controller, I think you can determine if you want to keep the logic of like what to display,
Hmm.
like which partial. You can detect if it's I'll be careful because I'm trying not to mix up my HTMX in here, but you can detect the type of request that's coming in. So if it is a type of a turbo request, for example,
Hmm.
then you can decide like, oh, I just want to render this, not so it'll say like render partial layout faults kind of a deal. And you could do
Yeah.
all your logic in the controller to like you, pretty much what you have there, but instead of Oh, but you're redirecting. Okay, so that's it's going to get a little tricky.
That rings a bell though, and that is one possible way to go. So I'll make a mental note of that. Um, I'm trying to think like conceptually, if we were to have two different controllers, because we can do it with one controller, maybe we'll do that. We could also do it with two controllers. But if we were to have two, what is it? What's the resource that I'm requesting when I send a request to that other controller that just returns this? I don't know the answer to that. But if we're rendering runs show,
The runs, right? A runs resource or a
yes,
run.
build details.
I
And
think
by the way,
Michael
I'm
kind of
skeptical
naturally,
of some of these template names. What's that?
I think Mike kind of naturally called it a run detail earlier in the conversation.
Yeah. And I think my template names might be kind of out of date from an earlier time when I was thinking about things differently.
Can I
Um,
just tell you how glad I am to see that it's not only me that gets painted into a corner like this from time to time? This
ha,
is, I feel a little validated here. Whew.
good.
I've been in this spot a bazillion times, so it's familiar territory.
Hmm. And I like to think of us not as painted into a corner, but we're tied into a pretzel and we need to get ourselves untied.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, the problem is when people get into these situations and they just like tack on whatever the easiest way is to solve that particular problem without like reconciling the bigger picture so the whole thing becomes easier to manage. But okay, we have this thing and we don't actually need any of this. This is the nav.
Mhm.
We don't need that. Or no, we don't need that. Or do we? When we go from, yeah, we do need that. We do need that because we need everything from here down.
Mhm.
Okay. So this is interesting because it just starts here. This has everything from here down, but we actually need everything from here down.
Right.
Yeah, so we need this entire thing. It's the run show. Okay. And when we go to runs controller, what does the show action look like? Okay, the show action is pretty duplicative of the build show action. Because if we go to the builds controller
Mhm.
and just go between run show and build show, maybe it's not super obvious actually, but these are fairly duplicative. Hopefully you can see a little bit.
So the main difference it seems is that the build show is pulling in more than one run, whereas the run obviously is just doing the single. That makes sense. Like in your
R-
runs controller,
Right.
you have one, whereas in the build, it's querying all of the different runs. So like, how many do I have? Do I pick the first one, the last one?
Um, I think that's right, depending on what you mean. It's like the builds controller will either discover that there are no runs and so it won't show any runs, or it'll find that there are runs, in which case it just redirects to the run controller.
Correct.
So
Yep.
in a way, it's never dealing with runs. The only way it deals with runs is when it queries to see if there are any.
Gotcha. Yep. Okay. So we're on the same page there. Terrible
Okay.
pun, but yeah.
Um, okay. So I'm just gonna make a little observation here. I think this part of my design is bad. I think this is bad to have this duplication. I don't know what would be better. I don't know what I'm going to do about that. And I'm not going to burden myself right now with thinking about what to do about that. But I think it's helpful when you come across these things to make a mental note like, okay, this is not good. Okay, so this run show action, it's doing a lot more than is needed to get just this. The run show action is doing everything for the whole page.
Mhm.
Because right now it needs to. Because again, if you deep link to this run page, um, you're gonna, if you deep link to the run page, you need everything. You just can't deep link and have the page like show you this black part like that
Mhm.
would not make sense.
So, well, good news is you've already got it working, right?
Mm-hmm.
As far as like I always call it, like you're able to flush the toilet. You see the water go down, everything's
Uh-huh.
good. Yes. All right. So now we're like, all right, let's clean this thing up. I
We can flush the
sometimes,
toilet, but there's a turd in there.
yeah,
Somewhere.
it's just too much TP there. So, what sometimes I do just to mentally because it's like, oh, there's all this stuff I have to untangle, right?
Yeah.
If you work backwards, meaning if you were to focus on the end of the chain or the run, right? When you get to a
Mm-hmm.
specific one, how can you build that out? Right. So you've got the deep linked version, which is show me everything, right? I need the stuff on the nav on the left, all the stuff at the top, and then the ring detail. That's sort of like a traditional, just kind of like a traditional Rails page, right? Just get the data, puke it out onto the page. There we go.
Mm-hmm.
The other version of what you're trying to do is I want to see the run detail without everything else, right? And that to me tends to indicate that it's a different type of a request, right? So that's when you're trying to detect like the request coming into that URL. Is it a turbo? And I'm sorry if I'm really mangling the terms, but if it's a turbo request or is it
Mm-hmm.
just a typical HTML request? Because then in your sort of like, scaffold out a controller, always like, what's the request type or the response type that you got to put out?
Yeah.
That's where that comes in handy.
Yeah, so that might be a decent experiment. So we're here on the run show controller. Um, and I don't want to, a lot of developers have a bad habit of like when you need a new behavior, just add a conditional, just throw a conditional in there, and
Yeah.
then next thing you know, um, but we can at least do that to see if it meets our need. And
Hmm.
then if it does, we can say, okay, how can we tidy this up?
Exactly.
Okay, so if I go to the view for this, right now it's showing too much. It's showing both the run template, sorry, the run partial. I'm gonna go there. Yeah. So
Mhm.
we're interested in just this, but right now it's showing too much. Okay. So if it's an HTML request, we do want to show this, but if it's a turbo request, we only want to show this.
Yeah.
And if we're only showing this, currently we need the build because that's all over the place, and it looks like we at least need the current tab name. Whoops, and I just closed that accidentally. Yeah. Okay. Okay. So let's do this. Um, if request is turbo, only show run partial. All right, let's see if Super Maven is smart enough to give me the code I need. Hmm.
There is a request format.
Sorry, Ramsey?
Request format, HTML or
Yeah,
That's
yeah.
I forgot what it is, but he's right, 100% right. That's kind of what I'm alluding to.
All right. I think Super Maven is failing me here, so let me get the syntax from ChatGPT. We've all seen it a billion times, but I don't remember what the actual code is.
Your head's
Um,
a Tupperware container. There's only so much you can sneak in there before the burpable seal's no good.
huh.
Yeah.
Um, I feel like that's a Cook's Illustrated metaphor.
100%, man.
Um, okay, I want to make it so that if the request is a turbo request, it only renders this partial. Otherwise, if
You,
it's an HTML request, it does what it does now.
I think you should create a new view for Turbo.
You may you may well be right, Ramsey. Um,
Oh, there is. That's one way of doing it. The turbo request. Oh,
hmm.
so I apologize if this is faux pas, but in the Zoom chat
Uh-huh.
is just it's an example snippet. It has nothing to do with your code specifically, but that's the respond to format block.
Oh yeah, yeah. Yeah.
And I think that'll make it a lot cleaner in the controller where I would even worry about what you're querying in the back end. I would just say at the very end of when you're gathering all your data, right before you spit out the output, that's where
Mhm.
your respond to block goes.
Yeah, I was actually even gonna put it just like I was gonna do
Oh yeah,
this.
yeah,
And by the way, that's not faux pas at all. That's très bon.
yeah. All right. Beautiful.
Um, okay. So if it's Turbo Stream, I don't know what the deal is with this. This is not the right thing.
Yeah, that was just an example. Like,
Oh yeah, sorry, that didn't come from
yeah,
ChatGPT. That came from you. I already forgot.
yeah. And then another copy pasta, that's we get you.
Yeah. In format.html, I think we don't actually even have to do anything special there.
As long as I think you just got to make sure you return after the turbo stream one. So it'll be like render, run, show, and return if you're not going to do the
Oh,
format
really?
HTML. Pretty sure. Because,
Hmm.
like you say, it's going to fall through. So you just don't want to do a double render where if you're doing it'll like turbo stream, it does that. It's going to keep continuing down, I think. Yeah.
Okay.
But if you're going to do the format HTML, you don't need to do that, the and return. But that's your call.
Oh, okay. Um, okay, I'll do this for the moment. Let's see if that
Yep.
even works.
You can start with the format HTML and then put the Turbo Stream. And you don't need to add return.
Um, all right, let's come back to the return stuff later because I don't want to distract myself with that.
Yep. No, you're good.
Um, okay. So I don't know if it's working or not. We're at least not getting an error. But it's also no faster than it was. So
So
I am going to, what's that?
what are you getting back in your network tab? Like, what's the response?
Oh yeah, good question.
Are you getting everything still?
I'm getting everything still.
Can we do a
Oh, I
bimode?
know why.
Oh,
I
good,
know why that's happening. Um, that's happening.
because it's a redirect.
Yeah. You know what?
Oh,
Maybe each one of those should, okay, hang on. Build list item. That's not what I meant to do. Maybe instead of linking to a build, maybe it should actually link to a run. And if there are no runs, well, no, it can't link to a run because there's not always a run.
right.
Um, maybe it should say if there are any runs. Okay, I can't say this all in one go, so I'm just gonna start coding and try to explain it in a second. Um, if there are any runs, then do a certain thing for turbo stream and do a certain thing for HTML. Okay, so if it was HTML, we perform the redirect, and if it's turbo, we render we render the show page. Let's try that.
It's a good first step.
Actually, I'm gonna undo this all the way back to how it was because that no longer applies. Okay, clear this. Too few arguments. Okay. Oh, yeah, yeah, yeah. So I forgot to do a respond to. There we go. And this controller action is getting nasty, so we'll want to address that. Okay, that seems to work. Oh, but it's given us everything. The first
Can
one
you,
seemed fast.
right?
Hmm. But maybe it was just
Can you
self-deception.
find one where there is not a redirect?
Yeah.
Like that might help us.
Um,
Now, is this view here, would that be a run show?
run
No, it
show.
wouldn't because you don't
This
have
would be
a
build
run.
show.
Yeah.
Okay. But this is quite fast, which is interesting. And we also don't see any network request. Because it must be that it's going through Turbo.
So when you see it on the fetch, well, you should see it on all too, right? Yeah, I was gonna say.
Oh, I'm filtering it. Sorry.
Oh, all right, that'll do it.
Yeah. So,
Okay,
yeah, we see
nice.
Turbo here. Oh, but it's giving everything. That's interesting. Okay. Just to make sure we're not crazy, let me
Uh,
do this. I would expect that to give an error.
okay.
Yeah.
And this is because you're doing a redirect and there's no HTML block.
No, that's because it's an HTML request, and it's because I just made an HTML request,
Mhm.
but I'm not telling it what to do with an HTML request.
Right. So yes, you're correct. So you're doing a redirect, which brought you here, and you don't have the HTML block to tell it what to do.
No, I haven't even done the redirect.
Oh, really?
See, here's the part that does the redirect. I just blew that away
Oh,
entirely.
gotcha.
Yeah, so we're here. I click on this,
Oh, I see.
and it thinks it's an HTML request, which is
Yes.
interesting.
Oh, because you're saying the click from the left hand nav there is not issuing a turbo request. That's sort of what it sounds like.
Yeah, which makes sense, because why would it be? It's just a regular link.
Oh, it is.
Yeah.
You can add the turbo true in the
Yeah.
data.
Oh,
Okay.
inside the data hash that you have on the next line down.
Oh, I see. Okay. But I think everything's turbo true. Oh, never mind. Never mind. I don't know about that. Yeah, okay.
All right, so go, yeah.
Okay. Yeah, let me let me try something here. How do I make this into a turbo link? By the way, I know we're over time. If anybody has to drop, that's fine. I'm going to keep going at least for a little bit.
Yeah, keep going. That's cool.
Okay. What exactly is different here? I can't immediately tell.
So your build is the target.
Oh, turbo action advance. Interesting. For some reason, it took away my action. Um, but I don't care about that for the moment.
Mhm.
Let me just try this and see what happens. Okay, unknown format again. Um, but I actually don't know that what I'm doing here makes sense. Let me take this away, and I'll just say that. Um, and come to think of it, I don't even know if that's the right way to do that. Is there another place in a controller where I'm doing a turbo render? Looks like there's not. I don't think that part is even necessary. All right, let's try this. Oh, and shouldn't this be like render partial? Shouldn't I tell it that there's like no
Uh,
layout?
Listen, I think it's turbo stream, not turbo, not just turbo. Turbo stream, true.
Sorry, what's turbo stream true?
For the
Format.
link system.
Oh God.
Ramsey, what was the turbo stream true part?
For the link. Yeah,
So turbo stream true?
yeah.
Okay. I also think the controller action's wrong. Let me do this. Rails render turbo. I'm just gonna say Rails render turbo. Okay. Here they just have I'm gonna do this. Rails render turbo partial.
Because the turbo has separated the view.
This turbo has separated the view. Okay. I'm a little confused because I don't know that we're using a turbo stream. We have a turbo frame, but I'm not sure the difference. I'm not sure if a turbo frame necessarily involves a turbo stream. Okay, so Mike, you sent me this ChatGPT snippet here.
Yeah, it's sort of uh to help a poor schlep like me understand like
Hmm.
the most basic. I get lost in the weeds. So we've
Okay, here we go. Format.turbostream, turbostream action append. I see. Okay.
and so like as you go up towards the top a bit, it just to do kind of a quick gut check, you'll see like, all right, they've got the equivalent of your build list, which is their go down just a smidge on number two. That's the unordered list, the post list. So that's your build, right? So you're running out each
Hmm.
post. So if we go down one, number three, your post, your so this is your build link, and this is the basic format. So that's just saying um, go to take the so there's Sanjit, take the turbo frame or post the results to the post detail frame, right? Which I think you have that.
Yeah, let me go to their. Yeah, I think we don't actually want the turbo stream thing there.
I think you're right.
Turbo
So
frame
turbo
build.
frame
Okay.
build, and that's the big red box, right?
Yeah.
Okay. And now,
Well, this gives me an idea, Mike, actually. Let's simplify things a little bit for ourselves.
sure.
Um, instead of um, well, okay, let's get clear on what we're trying to do here. Um, so I'm trying to render the run show partial um by itself. And this is irrespective of what type of request it is. So we don't need anything to do with the format here. We just want to say 100% of the time we render the run show partial. Is that right? Is that what we want?
That run show is not a partial though, is it? That's a full page,
There's
correct?
actually both. There's a run show page and there's a run
Oh,
show partial, which
okay.
might be confusing. That probably is confusing.
So you gotta maybe make the distinction in the controller. It says render partial colon. So it's gonna go look for the partial show, not the view show or the full. There you go.
Yeah. I
Hey,
don't
I'm
know
gonna.
if we.
Thanks, guys. It was good working with you all today.
Hey, nice to meet you.
Yeah, thanks for coming.
See you guys.
Yeah.
Um, oh, and in run show. Okay, I don't know that we need to pass any locals. Let's just see what
No,
happens
you've
when
got
we.
yeah, you've got all your variables you need
Yeah.
to use.
Okay.
Okay. And closer.
So what is this missing required keys partial?
Partial.
Whoops, I didn't mean to do that. Okay, builds details line 15. Okay. Hmm. Yeah, so maybe because there's no. Hmm. Okay, partial is nil. It's interesting because this doesn't call for a.
Have you maybe never been calling the partial?
Oh, sorry, I see what this is. Current tab name is what the partial is.
Uh,
So current tab name. Okay. No, current tab name is current tab name.
oh, I gotcha.
Okay. Okay, so that still didn't work.
So there's no route that's run path. My guess is can in your routes, can I hit slash run? Or, can I go directly to because it looks like I
Um,
need to have projects and build and so forth. No.
there is a run path. It's just that it requires this partial. So,
Uh,
and I'm realizing now that partial is maybe not a good name for it. Um, we have test output, or if you go here, it's system logs.
uh,
Yeah. So it's like which run am I on and which like detail page am I on?
for the run.
Yeah.
Is, is the test output system logs report and events, is that all part of the run model, or is that a separate? Do you break that out
Yeah,
in
I'd
your
say it's part of the
database?
run model.
Okay.
Yeah, and as we're like looking at all this stuff, I'm realizing that there are some things that are causing confusion that that we should fix at some point, and
Mhm.
maybe the time to fix them is now because they're already causing pain now. Like for example, I'm going to go to runs controller, run show, run show. So we have a run show template, but then we also have a run show partial. That's confusing.
Should call that underscore run.
Well, I find that a little confusing too, because it's not as though the run has a run.
Well, and I'll back up and say the only reason I suggest that is sort of a standard naming when you scaffold things. So the partial of, like, if you're in post or page or whatever, the single version for the partial is always called that, because I think, again, this is just whatever it does by default. There's cases where you don't even have to put in or specify the partial, because it knows, oh, you're in the run controller with a run model. It'll just say render partial.
Oh,
Um,
interesting.
yeah, there's some helpers. And I always like to be specific about, like you're doing there. Tell me exactly what I'm rendering, so there's no magic. I like to see it,
Hmm.
but that's just sort of the naming scheme. But the other one might be like detail.
Interesting. Okay, I've never seen that before. Um, I'm making a mental note to have that as a candidate for the name. Conceptually, let's see if we can think of anything that has more like conceptual meaning. Um, so this area here, okay, so when we click on one of these, we're
Mhm.
visiting the run show page. That's fine enough. But then what is this section here? What is like this whole pane, the thing that used to be outlined in red? What is this? Well, maybe it's the run detail.
Right. Yep.
Okay,
I
that's
think
at
it's
least better
clear.
than show again.
Yeah.
Okay. And then here, of course, we'll need to change that to runs detail.
Does No, you're good.
Hmm. Okay.
I I wasn't sure if you needed to. Obviously, it works already. I was just part. I didn't know if you had to specify that it was a partial, but you don't.
Um, all right, no obvious problems. I'm going to commit that. Rename runs show partial to runs detail. Okay. And then we might have the same thing with build. Oh, maybe we don't. Okay, we don't. That's good. So it's just a run issue. All right, so now maybe we can go back to that builds controller. So
And
for
this is
some reason,
the
this all
show.
feels, sorry?
This is the show method that we're in. Yep.
Correct.
Okay.
For some reason, this all feels harder to think about than it should be. And I wonder if, there's uh there's essential complexity and accidental complexity. And is this hard to think about because of essential complexity or accidental complexity? I kind of think the latter.
The only sort of smell I have, and again, it doesn't mean it's stinky, but it would just be the redirect part. That I know for myself when I start doing that, that's sort of a band-aid for I need to think about my resource routing and like how I'm composing the views a little bit more, just to make sure
Hmm.
like why is this not a landing page? Why am I going somewhere else?
Yeah, let's focus on that a little. Um, these all link to a build, but okay, and when the build has no runs, then we can only go to the build. The build has no runs, we can't go to a run. But if the build does have any runs, currently we're redirecting it to the first to either the first failed run if there is one or just the first run. And conceptually that like I feel like that makes sense. At the same time, there's something that feels a little inelegant about it.
I think I gotcha. This keeps you to still be able to die on the hill that you want to die on. So that left hand nav is going to
Uh-huh.
require a little bit of tweaking, but the left hand nav, you're telling me, depending on the number of runs, etc., I'm actually linking to a different place. So by you doing the
Right.
redirect, sort of takes the logic out of the left hand panel and saying, I don't care. I'm just always going to link to the build and then go wherever it needs to go from there, right? Whether it's the first run or the second run that was failed or whatever the case may be. So if you want to keep that, that's path A. And I think like then we could just sort of etch that in and say that's sort of the what was the first version of complexity, sort of the
Yeah,
necessary
essential complexity.
essential, right? So you could chalk it up to that.
Hmm.
Um, but that does, the win there is it keeps your view super simple, right? You don't have to think about it. You're just linking to build. You're
Yeah,
putting
but the
all the
price we
word
pay is that the complexity goes into the controller.
and your performance kind of starts to degrade a little bit, right? So,
And not, yeah, not just the performance, but the cognitive burden of the whole thing.
mhm.
It makes this harder to understand. Here's a thought. Sorry to interrupt, but
No, you're good.
um, build list item. So here's something we could do. We could say link to I don't know what it would be, but like build this I don't like this name, but I'm gonna say like
Yep,
build home path for
yep,
build and then get this out of here and then there's like app
exactly. Yeah, you're
helpers.
essentially where I'm going right there.
Yeah, so here it's like and this is not the right home for this, but just to illustrate it.
Yep, so this is an
Yeah.
excellent like first cut because now you're pulling it out of there. You've got it going to the right place. Now you can start to like clean up your view so now get the turbo framework going the way that you intended it to work. And then this here would be something to note for later. This is where your performance stands a chance to improve even further because you can figure out, well, how can I get this information without having to go get all the runs every time that left hand nav renders,
Yeah. Yeah,
right?
so to
But
kind of
you can cache it,
summarize, uh-huh.
you know. Go ahead, sorry.
To summarize our thought process here, it's like we spent the last hour or whatever trying to trying to make these pages load via Turbo. And there were a
Mhm.
number of obstacles to that, but one of them was this redirect thing. It makes the whole thing a little bit more mind-bending. Um, And so I think my tentative, at least, path forward is get this redirect out of here so we don't have to throw that into the mix and have one more moving part. Let's get that out of here.
Hmm.
Instead, let's do that logic that we need to do. Um, Instead of linking to the wrong place and then figuring out what the right place is, let's just link to the right place in the first place.
Yes.
Yes. Um, and let's do this. If I do a get diff right now, this diff I think kind of illustrates the idea that we're thinking about. Like
Hmm.
we said a second ago, it's I don't like the name. Application helper is not where I want to put it, but this will at least give me a clue so that next time I pick this up, I'll be able to say, "Oh yeah, I wanted to like do this helper and do that stuff." I always like to leave a loose end hanging so that next time I start the project, even if it's a week later, I can hit the ground running and not have to be like,
Yeah.
"Where was I?"
Where was I? Yeah.
Yeah. So I'll end the session. I'll end the session there. Um, so takeaways because we didn't deliver aside from this tiny refactor that we just did, and I see that that build passed. Aside from that tiny refactor we did, we didn't deliver any new value today. But that doesn't mean it was a waste, and it doesn't mean no progress was made. So what was accomplished in this session? I think what was accomplished, and help me out, guys, if you have a way to express it, we uncovered some weaknesses in the design. We uncovered some aspects of the design that made it hard to make the change we want to make. The
You,
design, yeah, go ahead.
I was gonna say, and I'm just saying, like, if I'm writing this for my manager, I would
Hmm.
say we identified um, opportunities for refactor to allow us to take advantage of Turbo, which,
Hmm.
because it's not that like, oh, we found some bad roadblocks. So like you're like, oh, now I need to see where I need to refactor this to be able to improve performance, really. Because I don't think you were really in a position to. I like how you're focusing it on like, did we deliver value today in a way of a commit, not necessarily, but you also figured out like, oh, I need to redirect the ship a little bit to the right.
Yeah. Yeah. Let's see. The thing about we identified a place to refactor to change
Yeah,
it to turbo.
yeah.
To be fair, I think that's a little bit, if I were your boss, I'd find that a bit vague.
Fair
Um,
enough. I'm gonna get paid this Friday, but
so how can we phrase that in a way that's maybe more specific? Um, so the overall thing is the performance improvement. That's the big picture thing that we care about. And we found that the performance bottleneck we want to focus on is it's making these full page requests, or rather, it's making these full page responses when it really only needs to respond with a partial. But the design of the code currently makes it really hard to make that change. And so what we found was we found that there are some obstacles in the current design uh, to making the change we need to make to return just partials instead of full pages to make this performance improvement we want to make. Not only did we identify those obstacles, but we conceived of a path forward to take away those obstacles. Making it so that instead of doing a redirect, we figure out where we need to link to up front We expect that that will make the design in the relevant area a little bit simpler. It'll lighten the cognitive load. It'll make it easier to change. And so that's why we believe it'll make the performance improvement easier to make.
Got it.
Um, yeah, I think that captures it, right?
I I don't know really. I think you could word it three, four, five different ways, but they're all going to sound the same after a while. Like it's if your goal was performance improvement, you identified areas that required refactoring to properly take advantage of turbo, which gives you your performance improvement. That's how I see it.
Yeah.
And I think you said it. It's a matter of what your
Yeah.
boss likes to hear.
Yeah, and I actually tweeted something yesterday because I saw something that triggered me. Um, a lot of times like a boss will ask like, "Okay, so how did this like performance improvement thing go?" Um, Even though I said like that big long thing just now, that would not be my go-to response.
Yeah.
I think I would say something more like what you said, Mike, which is like we ran into some obstacles that make the performance improvement difficult, so we're going to work on taking away those obstacles and then make the performance improvement.
Yeah.
I think that's the summary I would give. And then, if and only if the boss is interested in the details, then I could maybe give those
Follow
details
up.
that
Yeah.
I did. But a lot of developers, I'm sure you've seen this, Mike, um, those jump straight in the details and give like a 5-minute monologue. It's like, so when
And
will
you
this
see
be
the eyes
done?
glaze over.
Yeah, and it's like, hey, that was not the question. The question is when will it be done, not like a super
Yeah.
detailed account of what you're doing right now.
Yeah, that's it's 100% true because I've had both scenarios where you tell them too much, their eyes are glazing over and you can see the drool starting to form. And then, or conversely, if you're too simple, they're like, all right, so what was wrong? When am I going to get it? Like, how many more days am I looking at? So don't tell them it was the flux capacitor
Yeah,
when, you're just like, we just need some refactoring. Turns out we added a little bit more in the controller than we should have to make turbo work efficiently. Because like right
yeah,
now, you just have a regular app, right? A regular server rendered app. Every time you go to a page, it's just reloading everything. So I think if you make a couple of tweaks, you're going to be able to leverage the turbo aspect of it that you're intending to use. And we probably wouldn't have had this discussion today because it would have already been in place. So
yeah, yeah. And not to correct you, but this app is so complicated that I don't want to confuse people as to how it's structured. We
yep,
are using Turbo already. It's just that our Turbo responses are returning everything, and
fair.
then only the one
Yes,
part is being used. Yeah.
good call.
Yeah. And that's a big challenge with this app because like it's not just a regular CRUD app. Um, and the challenge is to make the UI as nice as it can possibly be while still keeping the architecture as simple as it can possibly be. That's a very it's very tough to hit those two objectives, which are
Yeah,
sometimes at odds.
yeah, yep. No, I'm right there with you. I'm
Yeah.
I love the simple because at the end of the day, it's easier to go back and work on it, and your users certainly will appreciate the fact that you took painstaking efforts to keep her simple. So,
Yeah, exactly. Okay. Well, thanks guys for joining me, and I will see you next time.
all right, thanks.
All right, bye.
Bye now.